In this show, I talk about journaling a lot, and that is because, frankly, I believe in it. I believe in journaling. I believe in the art and the practice of sitting down with yourself and getting really acquainted with your own thoughts and feelings. No one knows you better than you, no matter what the expert is, no matter what the topic. You know yourself better than anybody else. And the best way to tap into that wisdom that I have ever found is journaling. Click the link in the show notes and grab a copy of The Treasured Journal. It's a journal made with you in mind.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Danielle Ireland, and you are listening to Don't Cut Your Own Bangs. This is part 3 of our 4-part What Now series. What now? You've done the work. You've therapized, you've coached, you've journaled, you've urinaled, you've yodeled, you've gone for walks, you've gone for runs, you've broken it down to friends. You are clear on what the decision is or what the problem is or the next right thing. You know what it is. And now you're faced with the gut punch of what do I actually do next? How do I move forward? So where we've come from, we've introduced what now, sitting with it, acting as if you have made the decision. Then we moved into episode 2, our desire for guarantees and the art of trusting ourselves, walking hand in hand, side by side with knowing there could potentially be some pushback from establishing and creating more space for myself, and the art of knowing that the only guarantee you have is really knowing what you feel as it relates to being the best decision you can possibly make, and taking that uncertainty and that vulnerability and the risk and the knowing you have in your heart and moving forward side by side. Now we meet the wall of anxiety. So the wall of anxiety, it sounds scarier than it is. What I like to do, I draw a little stick figure. If you imagine a piece of paper and you shift it from the long ways top and bottom to landscape, left to right, you draw a little stick figure on the far left side. And then I draw right next to the stick figure, a little just wall. You can do a line. I do like a little long, super long, skinny rectangle. Now, here's what the wall of anxiety is. I recommend and really enjoy writing it down. Sometimes writing it on a whiteboard. It feels a little less permanent, like you're getting it out of your head and down somewhere, but you can quickly erase a whiteboard. You don't have to stare at it all the time. I use pen and paper a lot, and you can also talk it through or think it through. My least favorite method is thinking about it on your own. It's just so easy for one thought to lead to another thought, and it can quickly spiral, particularly if we're trying to hold space and make space safely to inhabit things that make us anxious or fearful or tense. But I digress. This is a choose your own adventure life. You do you. Let's pretend, though, for the sake of conversation, that you are writing it down. You have a stick figure, you have your bubble wall, and then what you're going to do is you're going to draw these little lines through the wall, and you're going to essentially write down all of the outcomes that you're afraid will happen as a result of making this decision. So, for example, if I were to say, okay, I know what I really want to do is tell, and this is just hypothetical, but I want to tell my husband that I no longer want to do the grocery shopping for our family. It's just too much on my plate and I don't want to do it anymore. And if I were to say, okay, so on the left-hand side over the stick figure, this is the decision I've made, the conclusion I've come to, the thing I want. And then in the next column, I write all the things I'm afraid of. And you want to try to get somewhere between like 3 and 10. And 10 may sound like a lot, but as we go through this, even with this silly hypothetical example, you'll see how quick and easy it is to get to 10. But at least 3, probably no more than 10, but you can try to get to 10. I am afraid he will say no. I'm afraid he won't like me. I'm afraid he will resent me. I'm afraid he will judge me for it. I'm afraid he'll compare how much he earns to what I earn, and that will equate to our workload in the home. I'm afraid that, okay, I'm not sure where I got to, 5 or 6. But again, in this hypothetical example, it's hard to keep going. But right off the top of my head, that was pretty quick to get to 5 or 6. So you air those out as clear as you can. And what I would also add here is these do not need to make logical sense. Chances are the first 2 you write down will be the 1, 2, or 3 that are sort of swirling around in your consciousness the most. Like, I'm worried they're going to judge me. I'm worried they're not going to like me. I'm worried they're going to think this about me. And then from there, the reason why I like pushing past that a little bit is there's also usually hidden under the nooks and crannies, like the stone that remains generally unturned in our minds. An unspoken fear, maybe one that just feels so irrational or so silly that we maybe wouldn't normally let ourselves admit it or admit it out loud. In that example, maybe it's like, oh, I'm afraid he's going to leave me, or he's going to compare me to his mother because his mother would have never not grocery shopped. You just let yourself go to that place that maybe you're a little embarrassed about. Like, oh my God, if anybody knew that I was actually worried about this, I sound so crazy. I sound so silly when I say this. It doesn't make it not true. And so all we're trying to do for this particular part of the exercise is articulate the outcomes. We talked a little bit before in the previous episode about the potential risks of creating space for ourselves. This element of this particular wall of anxiety exercise does is it helps you clearly name and articulate the risks. Any perceived imagined risk, and some of your risks, or like the things that you're nervous about or anxious about, are probably rooted in past experiences that you've either had with this particular person, a situation like this before, or in previous life experiences. Your fears are coming from a place. Again, this isn't a character flaw or a character defect. It's true. We carry our pain around with us because we think it's protecting us. But a lot of the time, we don't realize how much power we're giving it and how right-sized it is to the situation at hand that we're actually living in. So we write them down, and then in the column, draw a line next to it, and then put a column next to it. So you have all of the reasons that you're afraid, all of the risk, and then right next to it, you're going to write down, so what? And I don't mean so what flippantly, like, well, so what? It's acting as if that thing that you were afraid of actually happened. What would you actually do? And this is one of the beautiful places where logic and emotion work really well together. So this is where your problem solving, this is where your concrete critical thinking skills are really going to come to your aid here. And you're going to write down next to each of the things you're afraid of, 1 to 3 things you would do in response to essentially your worst case scenario happening. So, I mean, that's why you have fire drills. That's why you have tornado drills, right? You have a plan of action for an outcome that you don't want to have happen. But mostly, I mean, and the chances of those extreme situations actually happening, well, depending on where you live, they're likely pretty minimal. But it helps ease the fear to know, in the event of this thing, I have a plan. And that's essentially what we're doing for you. We're helping you create a personal fire safety plan. So you write next to it, okay, well, if he were to judge me, what would I actually do? Well, I might feel bad. I might actually get kind of irritated because why do I have to do this thing? And maybe what that leads me to is probably would need to have a bigger conversation about him and how we divide responsibilities in home. It would, if he were to do that, it would probably lead me to having a much deeper conversation. I might even schedule an appointment with our couples therapist. So in that one example of something that I would be afraid of happening, I, within 15 seconds, came up with 3 things that I could realistically potentially do. They're not all going to be great plans either, but you're just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. And as you move on down the line, the other thing you're going to start to find, if you actually have to create a potential next step for a hypothetical thing you're afraid of happening, you're going to start to intuitively realize the final part of the exercise, which is in the column next to that. What is the likelihood in a percentage out of 100 that the thing you're afraid of is actually going to happen? That really, really right sizes the stress, because there might be a little scared part of you. It's like, oh my gosh, if I make more space for myself in this relationship, my, boss is going to fire me. My partner's going to leave me. I make this investment in myself and I'm going to run into debt and I'm going to be homeless and live in a shoebox. Those fears, it doesn't matter how much sense they make or don't make or how silly they are or not silly. If they are inhabited by you, they're definitely influencing the decisions you're making or not making, which means they have power over your decision. And what you're trying to do is put the power back in your hands. So as you look at the things you're afraid of happening, ask yourself, in a percentage out of 100, what is the likelihood that this thing that I'm really, really nervous about, that I now have an action plan for, what's the percentage it's actually going to happen? Some of them you might be 99% certain. Some of them you might be 2%. And what that does so quickly, it's like playing emotional shadow puppets. If I'm projecting a light and I'm making like some kind of figure with my hand, the closer my hand is to the light, the bigger the shadow is. But the farther my hand goes, right, the more perspective I have on it, the closer it gets to the wall, the tinier the shadow gets. Actually letting yourself consider, contemplate with a little bit of logic in service of you, not being critical of you, but being in service of you. Oh my gosh, the likelihood of this worst case scenario that I now have a plan for actually happening to me is so minimal. It probably doesn't deserve a lot of space in my head to contemplate. And then out of the 10 things that you found, you may see there's 2 that you may want to really devote some energy and time to. And from those 2, maybe you schedule an additional therapy appointment. Maybe you call your coach. Maybe you call a friend. Maybe you sit with your journal and you let yourself process it a little bit more. But it helps you narrow in on where would devoting a little bit more time and focus best serve me with regards to this. So that was the wall of anxiety. It's one of my favorite exercises to do. I always get a little bit more clarity than I had before when I use it. Like I've never done it and not gained something from it. It names your fear. It makes it specific. And then from that place, it's something you can manage and handle. It's not in the void. So again, pen and paper is my favorite way. There's also a whiteboard. That's another great option. You can explore it and discuss with a friend. You can also think it through in your mind. But again, that is probably my least favorite method. But I digress. This is choose your own adventure. You do you. Trust yourself. You know you better than anybody else. With that said, as always, your time, your care, your attention, and your presence here, they mean more to me than you know. I was so grateful to share this episode with you, one of my absolute favorite therapy exercises, and we can look forward to the 4th and final part of our 4-part What Now series next week, tips on making big tasks more manageable. Can't wait to see you then, and I hope you continue to have a wonderful day.